we say a Republican Party, they don't like black people, this is a perfect example of that. This Tarrant County District Attorney's Office, they have announced that they're going to be appealing last month's ruling by the Texas Appeals Court that overturned the Crystal Mason's 2018 conviction for illegal voting. Now, Crystal Mason was on federal probation for felony conviction in 2016 when she voted in an election with a provisional ballot. Now, she says she didn't know she could not vote. This actually went to court. The folks with the probation folks said in testimony that she didn't know. She was not told. She was convicted anyway. 2 years later of voter fraud and sentenced to 5 years behind bars because state law only allows felons to vote if they have fully finished their sentence, including any parole or supervision requirements. Now, keep in mind, she had to go back to federal prison for violating the terms of her probation, and then they tacked on 2 more years of supervised release. So although she has not gone to state prison, she did have to go back to federal prison because she was indicted. On March 28th, the Texas Second Court of Appeals overturned Mason's conviction because she didn't have, quote, actual knowledge, unquote, that she couldn't vote while on federal supervised release in a tax fraud case. Now, I want to read for you the statement because this is important before I go to her attorney. And it shows you how sadistic and shameful these folks are in Tarrant County, Texas. This is the statement that they released. And when I read this for you, you're probably going to say, you got to be kidding me. This is a quote from this statement. The trial court's guilty verdict should be affirmed. Voting is a cornerstone of our democracy. This office will protect the ballot box from fraudsters who think our laws don't apply to them. Crystal Mason, a 4-time felon, was convicted of illegal voting on March 28, 2018 in a bench trial in the 432nd Judicial District Court. She was convicted based on testimony from the election judge and poll clerk that she read the provisional voter affidavit, affirmed that she provided accurate information, signed the affidavit, and testified that the affidavit language was clearly understandable to mean that a convicted felon such as herself was ineligible to vote. On March 28, 2024, the Second Court of Appeals reversed her conviction and published an opinion stating that there was evidence showing Mason may not have known she was ineligible to vote on the day she voted. The Second Court of Appeals failed to give proper deference to the trial court's guilty verdict and reweighted the evidence in favor of Mason. The Second Court of Appeals misapplied the sufficiency standard of review by not viewing the evidence in the light, y'all gonna love this here, by not viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the trial court's verdict in contravention to binding precedent for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. The Second Court of Appeals publication of its opinion creates the very real risk that future sufficiency cases will likewise be wrongly analyzed and decided. This office requests that the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals grant review in this case, reverse the Second Court of Appeals decision, and affirm the trial court's guilty verdict. That's from the Tarrant County DA's office. Kim Cole, Crystal Mason's attorney, joins us right now. Kim, hate to have the fact that we're talking to you again about this case. This has been going on for 8 years. And for people who don't understand, she filed a provisional ballot. The ballot was not even counted. So it wasn't like it actually was included. That's one. They also lie in this statement, Kim, by saying that, oh, she knew this, she knew that. And then they also lie by saying that once there was evidence showing Mason may not have known she was ineligible. This is according to the court. So they're trying to say that they're wrong. There was testimony. Wasn't there actual testimony by a probation officer who said no one told her she couldn't vote? Correct?
That is absolutely correct, Roland. And it wasn't just a probation officer. He was a supervisory probation officer. He was over all the probation officers. And he testified on the stand. And this was their witness. This was not Crystal's witness. This was their witness that they called to the stand. And they asked him point blank, didn't you tell her that she was not eligible to vote? And he said, no, I did not. They conveniently leave out the fact that, they point out that she filled out a provisional ballot, filled out her, correct information. Yes, she did. Filling out a provisional ballot is not illegal. And then they go on, who, if she didn't think she was eligible to vote, or she knew she wasn't eligible to vote, who would put their right name on there, the accurate information? Who would sign the ballot if they knew they weren't eligible? She didn't know. And
yeah. And what bothers me here, again, I love this line here, that they misapplied the standard because they should have only reviewed evidence in light most favorable to the trial court's verdict. That's not their job. Their job is to look at the verdict, the prosecution, and the defense, weigh the evidence. So basically, the Tarrant County DA is saying, oh, y'all should overlook anything that doesn't make us look good.
And that's essentially what they're saying. Unfortunately, the hypocrisy is real, because we've seen time and time again that they have absolutely ignored precedent. Otherwise, we wouldn't be where we are right now with the Roe v. Wade situation, with affirmative action, and numerous other precedent that has provided and expanded rights for minorities. So the hypocrisy is real, right? But that is unfortunately the standard, that anytime there is an appeal, they are to view the evidence in the light most favorable to the upholding the verdict. However, that doesn't mean be ignorant. and they did not prove their case. Their witnesses contradicted each other. And what they also failed to include was that the Second Court of Appeals said that even if she had read the affidavit, there is absolutely no language whatsoever in that affidavit, because Crystal testified that she didn't read it. They're going on her two neighbors' testimony that was inconclusive that she read it. They're like, well, I think she read it. She was moving her finger. Anyway, Crystal did not actually read the affidavit. She was filling out her information, because on one side is the attestation, the other side is where she fills out her information. And she was putting her information on there because they did admonish her that she had to provide accurate information. And she made sure everything matched up with her driver's license. And so, that being said, even if she read it, there's nothing in the provisional ballot affidavit that says that if you are A, B, C, and XYZ, you are not eligible to vote. Nothing in there. So how would she have known?
Here's what's also interesting. I mean, here's the deal. So she was convicted of tax fraud. She was inflating returns for her clients in terms of preparing their taxes. Okay, That's why she went. But when you read their press release, Crystal Mason, a 4-time felon. Wasn't that tied to the same case? And so they're trying to give the impression that, this is a repeat offender. This woman is a menace to society.
Yes, that is absolutely. They have continued to persecute and disparage her. Here, what they failed to. Crystal isn't a saint, Roland. I mean, she isn't. Every saint got a past, and every sinner got a future. Okay, so she does have a prior criminal history. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be in this situation to ascertain whether or not she was eligible to vote. Okay, so that's how we landed here. Yes, she is a felon. However, what they failed to acknowledge in stating that she's a 4-time felon which they also included the one where she was acquitted, this particular case, but we can look past that, right? Yeah. Anyway, in all of her other cases, Crystal pled guilty. She admitted her wrongs, even to the case that got her sent to federal prison. She has no problem holding herself accountable for the things that she's done wrong. Why on earth would she fight for 7 years to prove her innocence when in all of these other cases, she admitted her guilt because she did something wrong? She was like, I did it. I mean, I'm going to take accountability for my actions. Here, she didn't know she was not eligible. So she refuses to accept responsibility.
Right. I mean, the thing that jumps out to me is, before I go to Matt and Michael with their questions. Okay. Has she gone to state prison? No. But she actually, because of this, she returned to federal prison for 2 years. You would think a common sense DA would say, okay, we've been dealing with this one case for 8 years. They literally are spending more time on this case than they have on heinous crimes that have been committed. So the waste of resources to me is unbelievable. This is, no, we're going to make an example out of this black woman. And this is about creating a chilling effect about anybody else who's formerly incarcerated in voting. The same thing they did when they attacked a black man in Houston who stood in line for 6 hours. And guess what? He was later found that he could vote. And he now says, hey, I'm not going to vote again because of what I went through. That's what this is all about.
You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. I've said over and over again, in their summation in Crystal's original trial, they said they wanted to send a message to voters, much like their ridiculous, disparaging, inaccurate statement that they released yesterday. They are trying to send a message. They are trying to, quote unquote, protect the ballot box, as if, of course, Roland, you know where that comes from, as if folk like us shouldn't be there. And so they are absolutely still trying to send the same message. 7 years later, 8 years later, we're coming up on another election. 8 years later, they're still trying to send the same message. They don't want folks who look like Crystal at the ballot box. They are trying to protect the ballot box, not from fraudsters, because let's be honest, we've seen the documentation of who was committing all the voter fraud in the past few elections. They don't look like Crystal. So they're not trying to protect the ballot box from from fraudsters. They're trying to protect the ballot box from those who have been typically disenfranchised by this system. And that is the whole point of them continuing to beat this dead horse.
And correct me if I'm wrong. There was a Texas Justice of the Peace, Russ Casey, who admitted to forging signatures to get on the primary ballot. And he pled guilty to records tampering. He resigned. That happened in 2018. These folks are spending more time, and he was an elected official. They're spending more time going after her than they did going after somebody like him.
Yes.
And in fact, before that, and he was sentenced to 2 years in jail, but it was probated over 5 years. But they want to send her to prison.
They absolutely want to send her to prison because they want people who look like her. They want to protect the ballot box from folks who look like her and you and me. And want to send, and Mr. Rogers down there in Houston, they want people that look like us to fear that they may suffer the same fate. Look at what all they're doing. Look at all of the taxpayer money they're spending to put an innocent woman in prison. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Matt Manning, your question.
So, Kim, thank you first for your advocacy. You're doing stellar work. And ironically, I'm writing a PDR to the Court of Criminal Appeals as we speak. This is really kind of appreciate. But my question to you is this. First, have you ever seen an appeal like this? Because my understanding is the Court of Criminal Appeals sent it down saying y'all used the wrong construction of the statute. And the opinion that came out of the Second Court of Appeals was determining the sufficiency of the evidence. So as far as I see this is purely political. And to that end, is there any mechanism that y'all have to dismiss a frivolous appeal like you would like a Rule 91A dismissal on the civil side or any dismissal like that? Because I think it's frankly unethical to appeal it following the Court of Criminal Appeals opinion in this case. But I haven't seen the mechanism whereby you could get it thrown out, just on its face, because I don't know how to get there at all.
From my understanding, there isn't one. We will have an opportunity to file a response to their request for discretionary review. So we're still, obviously, I'm not her only attorney, and we're still evaluating whether or not we will respond, because to be quite honest, it's trash. I don't know if you read it. It's trash. And, we're debating whether or not we actually even, want to even give it the credence to draft a response. But I believe ultimately we will, because we should say something, because this does not deserve the court's review. And hopefully the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals will not take it up. But no, I don't believe there's any mechanism like on the civil side where we can just get this out of here, please. This doesn't even require one moment of your time.
I mean, I think this is sanctionable, arguably sanctionable conduct, because it's so rare that you have the top court, and Roland, for all the viewers, the Court of Criminal Appeals in Texas is like our criminal Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So this is basically the criminal Supreme Court saying, y'all got it wrong below, look at it again, them acquitting following that instruction, and then this Tarrant County DA still trying to press the issue because he doesn't want to lose in the court of public opinion. But the court has already said what it is. So, I mean, to me, it's sanctionable because I don't think there's an ethical basis on which to advance this appeal. Anyway, my thoughts.
Well, I certainly hope the court actually does smack them down because this continuation of this case, it's 8 years. She voted in 2016. I'm sorry, you don't spend 8 years on a case like this. Michael?
All right, Attorney Cole, thanks for coming back on, giving us an update. First and foremost, how is Crystal doing with this new news? Number one. Number two, is there anything possibly the Department of Justice can do, the Civil Rights Division, anything like that in regards to suing Texas, what have you?
So first of all, Crystal is understandably distraught. She thought finally that this nightmare was over, because it is clear that she has been targeted. They haven't put this much. I always talk about the affluenza team, the case that made national attention. This young man committed several crimes, stole a vehicle, stole alcohol, killed 4 people. And they did not advocate him going to prison. Crystal filled out a form. That's it. She filled out a form with accurate information. She didn't lie on the form. And they want to send her to prison. This is absolutely ridiculous. I would agree that the continued prosecution should be sanctionable, because there is no basis for it. Absolutely no basis for it. So Crystal is not well. She's very upset. She really took particular issue with the DA's attempt to disparage her in their last statement. Their language was vile and very unprofessional. So she really took issue with that. To, paint her as a 4-time felon. No, this conviction was thrown out. So
Right.
you can say, so she isn't a 4-time felon, but they just really took, called her fraudster. They really took some low blows, and so she's not happy, and she was looking forward to moving forward with her future without this hanging over her head. She has had to worry for the last 7 years. At any moment, this case could have turned the opposite direction, and she would have been looking at 5 years in jail, in prison. And so she finally thought that was over. Your second question, and I apologize, I forgot what your second
Department of
point was.
Justice, Civil Rights Division.
Yeah.
Is there any role that they can play in this?
I think there's a role that they should play. There are some issues going on in Tarrant County that definitely would, and as a matter of fact, there's some other issues going on in Tarrant County, may not be known to you, but those of us locally know. I actually am drafting a DOJ complaint, not in regards to Crystal's case, but in some other infringements of rights there in Tarrant County. So the DOJ should definitely step in and actually make a move in Crystal's case too. Typically they don't get involved in pending cases, but they definitely should look at Tarrant County's prosecution, period. Not just in Crystal's case, but in their criminal prosecution, period. Because I guarantee you, Crystal's case is the tip of the iceberg as far as this malicious prosecution goes.
Wow. All right. Thank you.
Well, it is just, again, it is shameful to me. It is utterly ridiculous. And again, they are terrorizing this woman. That's what they're doing. Their behavior is an abomination. And I really believe that civil rights groups and others should be showing up at the Tarrant County Commissioners meeting, condemning the DA, demanding the commissioners do an audit of their department, to waste resources, to waste taxpayer resources, going after this one woman for 8 years is nuts. And I really do hope that folks in Tarrant County and Fort Worth are loudly protesting this district attorney, calling him out and demanding he answer to this, because this just makes no sense whatsoever.
I agree, Roland. I agree. And we have been, so many organizations and individuals have reached out in support of Crystal, and we are planning, they are planning some type of actual action and protest of them continuing to pursue Crystal, not just in the interest of justice, but also in the interest of fiscal responsibility. They're spending taxpayer dollars on a political narrative. And that's not how the taxpayers want their dollars spent. I would think if there are funds allocated toward fighting crime, they would really prefer that they pursue people who have actually committed crimes.
All right, I want to jump into the first story here. And, Friday's edition, the Friday, April 26th edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. It started late, so we had a shorter show, and some of the segments I did not get a chance to talk more and talk about some of the things that make some other points that I wanted to make. So if we look here at this story dealing with Crystal Mason, okay, I want to give you a little background information and then talk about this update. All right, so there was an article from NBCnews.com on March 28th, 2024. March 28th, 2024. Texas woman's prison sentence for attempting to vote illegally is thrown out. Texas woman's prison sentence for attempting to vote illegally is thrown out. The state appeals court ruling ends a years-long saga that garnered national attention. All right. So in this piece from NBC News, now here's a picture of Crystal Mason, okay, African-American woman. It says a Texas appeals court tossed out a woman's 5-year prison sentence for voting illegally on Thursday, March 28, 2024, ending a years-long saga that garnered national attention. Crystal Mason was sentenced in 2018 to 5 years in prison after she testified she did not know that she was ineligible to vote because she was convicted of tax fraud in 2011. She cast a provisional ballot in the 2016 presidential election with the help of a poll worker. Okay. Now, in Thursday's ruling, Thursday, March 28, 2024, in Thursday's ruling to overturn Crystal Mason's sentence, Second District Court of Appeals Justice Wade Birdwell wrote that, quote, finding Mason to be not credible, finding Crystal Mason to be not credible and disbelieving her protestation of actual knowledge does not suffice as proof of guilt, does not suffice as proof of guilt. Now, Crystal Mason testified that when she was in prison, she was not informed that she could not vote upon her release, Judge Birdwell said. Justice Wade Birdwell said. She was not informed that she could not vote upon her release. She also, quote, emphatically denied having read the provisional ballot's affirmations detailing felon voting restrictions, testifying that she did not know she was not allowed to cast a ballot because she was on supervised release from prison, according to Judge Birdwell. Now, Crystal Mason's provisional ballot was not counted. Her provisional ballot was not counted when officials determined that she was ineligible to vote because of her 2011 conviction, the ruling said. Quote, in the end, the state's primary evidence was that Crystal Mason read the words on the affidavit, end quote, Judge Birdwell said. Quote, but even if she had read them, okay, now this is critical here to the overturning of her case, overturning of her conviction. But even if she had read them, they are not sufficient, even in the context of the rest of the evidence in this case, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that she actually knew that being on supervised release, after having served her entire federal sentence of incarceration, made her ineligible to vote by casting a provisional ballot when she did so. So them not believing Crystal Mason is not enough evidence. The prosecution did not meet their burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she actually knew that she was not eligible to vote. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, not the defense. Okay, so even in the context of the rest of the evidence in this case, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Crystal Mason actually knew that being on supervised release after having served her entire federal sentence of incarceration made her ineligible to vote by casting a provisional ballot when she did so. Okay. Now, the Court of Criminal Appeals announced in 2021 that it would consider an appeal from Crystal Mason, who was out of prison on an appeal bond, Her 2018 sentence drew national attention, and critics have rallied against the lower court's decision. All right. So March 28th, we get news that her sentence was overturned. All right. And she thought that she could put all of this behind her and move on with her life. Well, we talked about on Friday, April 26th on Roland, Martin, Unfiltered, that the a Texas District Attorney, Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells, Sorrells. He's not satisfied, and he wants to persecute Crystal Mason some more. Okay, so there's an article from TexasTribune.org, TexasTribune.org, and I want to pull that piece up here. Tarrant County DA wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated. All right, now keep in mind that this provisional ballot that she cast was not counted, but they still want her to serve a prison sentence for what they call illegally voting. Okay, so here's the latest development in this case, and all this is designed by a former Confederate state, a former state that was part of the Confederacy that took up arms to preserve slavery, and then passed laws to suppress the African American vote after Reconstruction ends in 1877. This is all geared toward suppressing the African American vote today. Tarrant County DA wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated. Now, this article is from April 25th, 2024. Here's another picture of Crystal Mason as well. Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated, his office announced on Thursday, April 25th, 2024. Crystal Mason, a Tarrant County resident, was acquitted of an illegal voting charge on March 28th, 2024. Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells' office is now asking the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to overturn the ruling that cleared her. Now, Crystal Mason was convicted of illegal voting in March 2018 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for casting a provisional ballot in the 2016 presidential election while on supervised release for federal tax evasion. Quote, "This office will protect the ballot from fraudsters, who think our laws don't apply to them," District Attorney Phil Sorrells' office said in a statement. So they're trying to further criminalize her by referring to her as a fraudster. Now, this office, the District Attorney's office argues, the Second Court of Appeals did not give proper deference to the trial court's guilty verdict, and reweighed the evidence in favor of Crystal Mason when it overturned her conviction. Now, District Attorney Sorrells' office adds, Crystal Mason was fairly convicted based on testimony from election staff that she understood she was not eligible to vote. But Crystal Mason's attorney, one of her attorneys, Kim T. Cole, on Roland, Martin, Unfiltered, and as you saw on the show, said that's not true. Okay, the Crystal Mason has maintained she did not know she was ineligible to vote. Okay, and they said that there was a poll worker who testified that Crystal Mason read the full affidavit. Crystal Mason denies that. Okay, quote, "It is disappointing that the state has chosen to request further review of Ms. Mason's case, but we are confident that justice will ultimately prevail," Tommy Buser, B-U-S-E-R Clancy, senior staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas, said in a statement. "The Court of Appeals decision was well-reasoned and correct. It's time to give Ms. Mason peace with her family. It's time to give Ms. Mason peace with her family." Now, though it had initially upheld her conviction, the Tarrant County-based Second Court of Appeals overturned that conviction in March. after the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals instructed the lower court to, quote, evaluate the sufficiency, end quote, of the evidence against Crystal Mason. Evaluate the sufficiency, end quote, of the evidence against Crystal Mason. Initially, the court found that Crystal Mason's alleged knowledge that she was on supervised release and therefore ineligible to vote was sufficient for an illegal voting conviction. Her alleged knowledge, okay? But in instructing it to reevaluate the case, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeal ruled the lower court, quote, erred by failing to require proof that Crystal Mason had actual knowledge that it was a crime for her to vote while on supervised release, end quote. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, not on the defense. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeal ruled that the lower court ruling was wrong because the lower court erred by failing to require proof that Crystal Mason had actual knowledge that it was a crime for her to vote while on supervised release. She had served her federal prison sentence. Now, the years-long saga began in 2016 when Crystal Mason, on advice from a poll worker, submitted a provisional ballot during that year's presidential election after she discovered her name was not on the voter roll. Her provisional ballot was rejected because she was not eligible to participate in elections while still on supervised release for a federal tax fraud conviction. She was arrested a few months later. Now, the case against Crystal Mason hinged on an affidavit that she signed before casting her provisional ballot that required individuals to swear that, quote, if a felon, I have completed all my punishment, including any term of incarceration, parole, supervision, period of probation, or I have been pardoned, end quote. A trial court judge convicted her of illegally voting, a second-degree state felony at the time, after a poll worker testified. This was when we talked to Attorney Kim T. Cole on Roland Martin Unfiltered. She mentioned this poll worker who testified at Crystal Mason's trial. Okay, a trial court judge convicted Crystal Mason of illegally voting, a second-degree state felony at the time, after a poll worker testified he watched Crystal Mason read and run her finger along each line of an affidavit. Okay, now this was presented as evidence that she understood she was not eligible to vote. Crystal Mason, however, said she did not read the entire affidavit. At trial, a supervisor, now this is another key point right here. At trial, a supervisor from the probation officer overseeing Crystal Mason's release testified that no one from that office had informed Crystal Mason that she was still ineligible to vote. So you have somebody presenting something as evidence that does not reach the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. You have a poll worker testifying that she ran her finger along each line of the affidavit. And then you have a supervisor from the probation office overseeing Crystal Mason's release testifying that no one from that office had informed Crystal Mason that she was still ineligible to vote. Now, in its 2022 ruling instructing the lower appellate court to reevaluate the case. The Court of Criminal Appeals held that Texas election law requires individuals to know that they are ineligible to vote to be convicted of illegal voting. Okay. In its 2020 ruling instruction, the lower appellate court, in its 2022 ruling instructing the lower appellate court to reevaluate the case, the Court of Criminal Appeals held that Texas election law requires individuals to know that they are ineligible to vote to be convicted of illegal voting. Well, the supervisor that is over from the probation office overseeing Crystal Mason's release testified that no one from that office had informed her that she was still ineligible to vote. Now, the law had been clarified by lawmakers in 2021 with additions to the election code stating Texans may not be convicted of voting illegally. Texans may not be convicted of voting illegally solely upon the fact that the person signed a provisional ballot, and instead required other evidence to corroborate they knowingly tried to cast an unlawful vote. Okay, now it's pathetic and sick and sad that you have Texas District Attorney Phil Sorrells, who still wants to persecute Crystal Mason after her conviction was overturned by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But all of this deals with understanding law. All of this deals with understanding law and how law governs every aspect of our lives. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, if the African American vote does not matter, why are they working so hard to suppress the African American vote? Why are they working so hard to intimidate us? When you look at the state of Florida, the election integrity task force that Governor Ron DeSantis put together to go after people who they claimed were voting illegally. Okay, this is designed to suppress the African American vote. Now, when we look here at, there was a piece from the Washington Post, okay? And this article here from the Washington Post deals with how GOP-led efforts, GOP voter fraud crackdown overwhelmingly targets minorities and Democrats. If we look at this article here from the Washington Post, let me pull this up. And this is a piece from 2023. GOP voter fraud crackdown overwhelmingly targets minorities, Democrats. Blacks and Hispanics made up more than 75% of defendants, and Democrats nearly 60%, in a controversial push by Republicans to prosecute election cheating, according to a first of its kind analysis by the Washington Post. Now, this article is from December 20th, 2023. African Americans and Hispanics made up more than 75% of defendants, and Democrats made up nearly 60% of defendants in a controversial push by Republicans to prosecute election cheating. If we look here quickly at this piece, as Donald Trump falsely claimed the 2020 presidential election was stolen from him, Republicans in some states launched special units to prosecute voter fraud as part of a high-profile and controversial push to stamp out cheating some claimed was rampant. But the election integrity units established or expanded in six states after Trump's loss obtained only 47 convictions during a period in which tens of millions of votes were cast, and the units overwhelmingly targeted minorities and Democrats for prosecution, according to a first of its kind analysis by the Washington Post of nearly every prosecution. So okay, let's go through and look at this slowly. Tens of millions of votes were cast. Okay. But in 6 states that launched these voter integrity commissions, there were only 47 convictions for illegally voting. Only 47, not 47 million convictions, not 47,000, 47 convictions out of tens of millions of votes cast. And African Americans and Hispanics were heavily targeted. Now, the analysis found that 76% of defendants whose race or ethnicity could be identified were African American or Hispanic, while white people constituted 24% of those prosecuted by the units. Now, white people are according to the 2020 census, 57% of the U.S. population. But 76% of the defendants were African Americans and Latino. Registered Democrats made up 58% of those targeted whose party could be identified, while registered Republicans were 23% of those targeted. In the rest of the cases, the defendant was not registered with the political party. The Washington Post was able to determine a defendant's race, ethnicity, or political party in roughly 70% of the cases. Okay, read the rest of this piece here. This is all about voter intimidation. This is all about voter intimidation and trying to suppress the African American and Latino vote, because you have some white people, not all white people, but some white people fear that by the year 2043, they are going to be a numerical minority in this country, and they fear what's going to happen to them. Now, all white people don't fear this, but there's some, especially a lot of Republicans, who do, and they fear what's going to happen to them when they become a numerical minority in this country. Some of them feel like they are losing power. Okay. And as we talked about in my deconstruction of Candace Owens' interview on the Breakfast Club, the 2 shows that we did dedicated to that, what you have is cultural anxiety. When we look at going back to the 2016 presidential election, okay, there was a piece from the Atlantic.com, dealing with how it was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Donald Trump. This piece right here from Atlantic.com from May 9th, 2017. So read this article right here. Let's flip over to this. It was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Trump. A new study finds that fear of societal change, not economic pressure, motivated votes for the president among non-salaried workers without college degrees. Okay, this is the fear, the browning of America. That's what this is, the fear of the browning of America. Okay, so read this piece here from the Atlantic.com. It was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Trump. And there were other stories that came out after the election that dealt with the same topic. Okay, now, you have to understand history to really understand this attack on voting rights, and also felony disenfranchisement laws. And your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. So I'm not just a national political commentator, and you watch me every Friday on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm also a historian. I've been on Roland Martin Unfiltered basically pretty much every Friday since October 2020. So it's going on 4 years. To get a better understanding of this history, if we look at this piece here from the Brennan Center for Justice, this deals with voting rights restoration in Florida, voting rights restoration in Florida. So going back to 2018, and we talked about this story on the African History Network show. We talked about it on Roland Martin Unfiltered as well. You had Desmond Meade, a former felon Desmond Meade, African-American man, who led the charge, one of the main people leading the charge to restore voting rights for ex-offenders, okay? And they put it on the ballot. He got over 60% of the vote, something like 66% of the vote, okay? But then the Republican-controlled state legislature there in Florida then passed the bill to put restrictions on people getting their voting rights back. Okay, so you had to pay all your fines and any restitution, things like this. They put all these restrictions to limit the number of ex-offenders who could actually vote, because they know if these people voted, they will vote these Republicans out of office. So this is about maintaining power. And you've heard me say a number of times, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay, politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink to the food we eat to the air we breathe. Voting is only one small part of politics, but voting is an extremely important part of politics, because that determines who's going to hold political office, who will have political power to actually write legislation, get legislation passed, who will have political power to appoint people to the cabinets, appoint a Secretary of Education, attorney generals, whether at the federal level or at the state level. Okay. And at the federal level, it's the U.S. Senate that confirms Supreme Court justices, confirms federal judges, which are lifetime appointments, but also confirms members of the president's cabinet. Okay, whether you talk about Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Small Business Administration, Attorney General, etc. That's the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. senators are either elected or appointed by a governor. When you have a senator who dies in office or who resigns and someone else has to finish out that term, they are appointed by the governor. Okay, so you have to understand how all this comes together. I teach a whole concept called political self-defense, and political self-defense deals with understanding how laws and policies impact conditions of African Americans, and understanding the laws, and understanding how to disarm them of this weapon and use the laws to our advantage, but at least reduce the amount of harm that laws and policies inflict upon us. Okay, this is dealing with understanding political self-defense. All right, now let's look at this here quickly. Okay. Now, this is at the Brennan Center for Justice, voting rights restoration efforts in Florida. This is from last updated August 7th, 2023, originally published May 31st, 2019. Okay. And what I want to focus in on here, when we look at felony disenfranchisement laws, we see them largely developed after the 13th Amendment, after the 15th Amendment, is adopted in February of 1870. The 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote for African-American men, not women at this time, but not African-American women, but African-American men at this time. Okay. However, if we go back to 1868, when Florida wrote their state constitution, okay, 1868, when Florida wrote their state constitution, we're going to see that Florida state constitution had a felony disenfranchisement law written into it. And I'm trying to find that part. Hold on, let me see something here. Because in one of these pieces from the Brennan Center for Justice, you can read that one here, but I think this is the one that I want. There's one dealing with yeah, this one right here. This is what I want. This deals with Florida when they wrote their state constitution in 1868. Okay, the name of this, and I'm going to close this out here. This is the one that I want right here. Let's see, let's go to it right here. This is called History of Florida's Felony Disenfranchisement Provision. History of Florida's Felony Disenfranchisement Provision. This is from the Brennan Center for Justice, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Brennan, B-R-E-N-N-A-N, Brennan Center for Justice, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And it talks about the constitutional provision disenfranchising people with felony convictions was originally enacted in the aftermath of the Civil War in 1868. So Civil War, we know, ends 1865. 13th Amendment is ratified December 6, 1865, adopted December 18th, 1865. Okay. Aftermath of the Civil War in 1860, aftermath of the Civil War in 1868, as one of several tools to suppress the votes of newly freed slaves. Okay, the constitutional provision disenfranchising or taking away somebody's right to vote if they're convicted of a felony was originally enacted in the aftermath of the Civil War in 1868 as one of several tools to suppress the votes of newly freed slaves. 100 years later, in 1968, the provision was reenacted despite its history of discrimination and its continuing racially disparate effects. Felony disenfranchisement has long been used to diminish the voting power of Florida's African-American population, and the law continues to have that effect. Okay? So this is all about targeting African-Americans and suppressing our vote, which diminishes our political power. Felony disenfranchisement has long been used to diminish the voting power of Florida's African-American population. And the law continues to have that effect. So this is why oftentimes you hear me say that we need to stop telling African-Americans to exercise your right to vote. Stop telling African-Americans to exercise your right to vote. If you want to exercise, you go to the gym and work out. You don't vote for exercise. You vote for power. You vote for power. You vote for policies that are beneficial for you, your family, your communities, and your people. Okay? Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. You don't vote for exercise, you vote for power. When we change the purpose of voting, when we change our messaging and explaining to people why you vote, then you will get better results. As long as you think you vote for symbolism, as long as you think that you vote because Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and John Lewis and Hosea Williams fought for you to have the right to vote, okay? And as long as you believe nonsense like it doesn't matter who you vote for, just vote, that's nonsense, because you can be voting for people who are working to dismantle the legacy of Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and John Lewis and Hosea Williams, etc. Okay? So you have to vote with purpose in understanding policies, understanding politics, understanding law, understanding how these policies impact you. Whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans, and what's good for African Americans are good for America in general. Whose policies will do the least amount of harm? Which candidate can create an environment for you to push your agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished? Who will protect gains that have already been made? Who will protect gains that have already been made? And one of the problems is we don't understand how to assess gains and progress already made. So we will operate under an illusion that no progress has been made, therefore nothing's at stake. And as we just saw with affirmative action, as you saw a few months ago, affirmative action in college admissions was overturned by a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that's operating based upon an ultra-conservative agenda. And that 6-3 Supreme Court was put in place by Donald Trump, who got, and he got nominations provided to him from lists that came from the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society, two ultra-conservative right-wing think tanks. They provided him lists of names, and he got 226 federal judges confirmed, which is a lifetime appointment. He got 3 Supreme Court justices confirmed. This was after Attorney General, that was after Merrick Garland was blocked in 2016 by Senator Mitch McConnell, and Republicans took back control of the U.S. Senate in 2014. They blocked 103 federal judge nominations that President Barack Obama made, and they blocked Merrick Garland as Obama's Supreme Court nomination. They did not even give Merrick Garland a hearing. So when Donald Trump becomes president through the Electoral College, and most people don't understand how the Electoral College works, okay? When Donald Trump becomes president through the Electoral College, he gets Neil Gorsuch confirmed, he gets Brett Kavanaugh confirmed, and then after Amy Coney Barrett dies, they push through after Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, they push through Amy Coney Barrett right before the 2020 presidential election and get a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court locked in, and they are serving for life. These are lifetime appointments. So then when the Dobbs decision comes out dealing with taking away the protections for abortions based upon the 14th Amendment, that gets struck down by the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. Okay. And this has been protected rights for women since 1973. Then you have affirmative action in college admissions struck down by the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. You had President Joe Biden's executive order when it came to student loan forgiveness, which would have moved 500,000 African American families from a negative net worth to a positive net worth. This gets struck down by Donald Trump's 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. So because you had people who didn't understand what was at stake in 2016 and did not understand that one of the lasting effects and probably the most important lasting effect of a president is the president's Supreme Court justices. George H.W. Bush, the father, George H.W. Bush, nominated Clarence Thomas in 1993. I think it was 1993. Clarence Thomas is still on the bench ruling, especially on cases against African Americans 31 years later. George H.W. Bush is dead. Clarence Thomas is still on the Supreme Court ruling on cases that impact Americans, especially African Americans. So, see, we have to understand political self-defense and understand defense and offense at the same time and fight against us. This is why we have to stop telling African Americans to exercise your right to vote. You vote for power. You vote to acquire power, to put people in place, to pass laws that are beneficial to you. Now, laws are not only going to be beneficial to African Americans because based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination and fairly assisted programs, it's illegal to have policies only from one race of people. Race-based policies are illegal. You can have policies that are for minorities. You can do that, but policies only for African Americans, only for one race of people, that's illegal. Okay. And I talked about this when I do my presentations dealing with reparations, when I spoke to the Detroit Reparations Task Force, March 2nd, 2024, when I did my presentation, and you can watch that lecture that I did on our social media platforms, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Also, I'll put it on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll get it up there as well. But if you go to archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, and I'm going to pull up a slide from the presentation here because I show this to people because unfortunately many of our people don't understand law, don't understand history. But most Americans don't understand law and history either. I show this to people so we can deal with facts and evidence, okay, because proper documentation ends all conversation. Section 601 of the, let's go to this slide here, of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And if you just Google, why are race-based policies illegal at the federal level? Usually the first hit that comes up is this right here. Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Non-Discrimination and Fairly Assisted Programs, Section 601. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So you can write policies. Now, this is at archives.gov. Archives.gov is the U.S. National Archives, the U.S. National Archives. You can also read the Presidential Records Act of 1978 at the U.S. National Archives website also, because it doesn't say a president can keep classified documents once they leave office. That's not what the Presidential Records Act says, but you can read it for yourself. So you can have policies for minority groups, things like that. And I hear people operating based upon this misinformation out here by Black social media disinformation agents, podcast pimps, and social media whores out here just lying to our people, not providing any evidence. But I hear people saying that, I don't want minority programs. I don't want minority set aside programs, things like this. We want policies only for African Americans. That's not going to happen. That's illegal. You're not going to have policies only from one race in the first place. But as somebody who managed an African American owned company that had government contracts with the city of Detroit, county of Wayne, and state of Michigan, and who was also a minority-owned business and have minority business status, because in various municipalities, in various states, in various counties, you get minority certification, and it gives you an advantage in bidding on contracts. Okay, you get extra points in the point system when they determine who to get a contract to if you are a minority-owned business. All right. So the question that I would ask people, having that experience, having managed won numerous government contracts, having managed a business that had the majority of our employees were African Americans, the question I would ask people is, why wouldn't we focus on being the minority that's getting the majority of the benefits? Why would we not focus on being the minority getting the majority of the set-aside contracts, things like this, after having actually done it? Now, if you just listen to somebody on YouTube that doesn't have any experience, or somebody on social media has no experience in doing this, and they're just spouting talking points, okay, they're just trying to get more clicks and likes on social media posts, then they'll say some stupid stuff like that. They'll say something, oh, we only want race-specific policies. These are people who never read the 1964 Civil Rights Act, never been involved in writing public policy for a major city. I've been involved in writing public policy for the city of Detroit, okay, which is how I learned about this federal law. Because our corporate counsel, I was on a committee to write an executive order for the city of Detroit. Our corporate counsel, at our first meeting, Sharon McPhail told us it's illegal to write policies that are only for African Americans, but we can write policies for Detroit-based residences, and the majority, the population of Detroit was 85% Black at that time. Okay, so you have to understand how to navigate throughout the system. Read this here. So this is at archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, Civil Rights Act 1964. Okay, archives.gov, and it goes through and it gives some of the history of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It has the actual text here that you can read it. But if you just search for 601, okay, we're going to go right here. We want Title VI. Title VI, non-discrimination and fairly assisted programs. This is it right here. Now, most of these people you watch on social media don't understand law, and they're not going to tell you this. And they've never been involved in writing public policy or anything like this. I've done all that. That's how I know this. So I'm not talking about something that I saw in a documentary, even though I'm in 7 documentaries. I'm not talking about something that I read in the book, even though I read numerous books. I'm talking about from actual experience, actually doing it. Okay, so read that. Now, let's go back to this from the Brennan Center for Justice. This deals with felony disenfranchisement law, and this deals with the state of Florida. But we see similar things in other states when they start rewriting their state constitutions after slavery ends, but especially after Reconstruction ends in 1877. Okay. Criminal disenfranchisement in Reconstruction, Florida. In 1868, Florida dramatically expanded criminal disenfranchisement. 1868, 3 years after chattel slavery ends, 3 years after the 13th Amendment. For the first time in 1868, the state of Florida barred from the polls, from the voting polls, all people with felony convictions. Okay, all people with felony convictions. So before slavery, like white people with felony convictions, it was all right to vote. After slavery ends, now these black people want to vote. Oh, no. We can't. We have to prevent a Negro legislature. Well, we have to prevent this. What was the fear? The fear was African Americans gaining political power and being able to vote, hold office in state legislatures, being able to write policies that white people had to abide by, write laws that white people had to abide by, and vote on those laws. This was at a time when the African American population in Florida was 48%. Okay? In 1868, African Americans were 48% of the population of the state of Florida. And they said that and white people said they were doing this to prevent a Negro legislature, Negro legislature. So they put this felony disenfranchisement law in place in 1868, and you lost your right to vote for life. You lost your right to vote for life. But not only that, what they did was they expanded the number of laws that were classified as felonies. Okay, so let's look at this. For the first time in 1868, the state of Florida barred from the polls all people with felony convictions, while at the same time creating a host of new felony crimes. The list of disqualifying infamous crimes was expanded as well. African Americans were disproportionately disenfranchised under the new provision because state policies at the time were designed to control newly freed slaves. State policies at the time were designed to control newly freed slaves through the criminal justice system. In 1865, the Florida state legislature enacted black codes as a way to control freedmen, former slaves, freedmen. A crucial component of the codes was an expansion of the criminal justice system to deal with minor offenses, that legislators believed blacks were more likely to commit and that had been formerly punished by their masters. Okay, crimes that they believed blacks were more likely to commit and crimes that had been formerly punished by their masters. The black codes had their desired effect. By the 1870s to 1880s, estimates show that more than 95% of the convicts in the Florida convict camps were African American. More than 95% of the convicts in the Florida convict camp were African American at a time when we're 48% of the population in the state of Florida. A captain in one of the camps at the time noted it was possible to send a Negro to prison on almost any pretext, but difficult to get a white man there. Okay, and then they talk about how we were 48% of the population and how this was done to prevent a Negro legislature. Okay, so read the rest of this here. This is about the fear of African Americans gaining political power, utilizing political power. History of Florida's felony disenfranchisement provision. This is at BrennanCenter.org. BrennanCenter.org. All right. Now, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We do with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 10 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover. We deal with 80 to 100 articles, and I put together this class. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. Okay, I've been studying history 34 years now, do lectures across the country, been hosting the African History Network show 14 years. But we look at, there's over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles that we'll go through and look at. The 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I'll show you excerpts of the books on the screen usually. And we look at video clips of interviews I've done with historians like Professor James Small, Professor Kabahai Wafa-Kamene, Anthony Browder, who wrote Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, which is one of the books we use in the class, Runoko Rashidi, who wrote Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe, which is another book that we use in the class, okay? So you can register for this. Its content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. And we'll post the link here. The link's in the thread of this broadcast. And you can support us through PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me /the AHN show. So we have the information right here on the website as well. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there. These are fake African History Network Cash App accounts here that have been stealing money from us. There are a few other ones out there I've identified. I'm still trying to get them shut down. You can click right here on our link and it shows our QR code, okay, for Cash App. This helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, etc. Upgrade equipment, take care of what needs to be done. All right. Okay, let's go back to this story here. Now, quickly dealing with felony disenfranchisement. Okay, then we're going to move to the next story. A lot of people don't know. So when we look at the history of felony disenfranchisement, right, especially in these former Confederate states, there's a good article that we use in the second class that I teach, dealing with Black resistance movements, Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. That's the second class that I created and that I teach. This is a good article here from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. This deals with how Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African-American vote for generations. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African-American vote for generations. And one of the things they talk about in here is the all-white primary. So they talk about the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. They helped kicked off a lot of this. Now, the poll tax law in 1889, Florida instituted their poll tax law, which was a tax that you had to pay to register to vote. That was the year before the Mississippi State Convention. But after Mississippi has their state convention, rewrites their state constitution, impose poll taxes and literacy tests, things of this nature, obstacles to the 15th Amendment, we're going to see other states do the same thing. Georgia, Alabama, 1901, Georgia, I think it was 1910, South Carolina, 1895, Louisiana, 1898. Okay. But so you have literacy tests that are put in place. Okay. This is one of the ways that they try to suppress the African-American vote. Poll taxes, but also all white primaries. Now, this is something that the state of Texas did, where Crystal Mason is being persecuted right now. All white primaries were instituted by Democrats at the time. Now, this is before the party realignment was completed in 1968 with the election of Richard Nixon. And you had a shifting in the parties, which began with the party realignment begins in 1928, which is what is known as the Lily White Movement of 1928. The Lily White Movement of 1928. Okay. And this was the effort to push African Americans out of the Republican Party. And we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party. Okay. There was a article that I did a 3-hour lecture dealing with the history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. There was a piece from there was a piece from one of these Chicago publications, and it dealt with the beginning of the Lily White movement. This was an effort to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and get Herbert Hoover elected as president. So Republicans appealed to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover. Okay. And they started ignoring the needs and concerns of African Americans and started pushing us out of the Republican Party, started ignoring the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, largely as a result of the movie The Birth of a Nation. And we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party. So by the time the 1960 presidential election takes place between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, 60% of African Americans had already switched over to the Democratic Party. And one of the things that caused the switch was we found, even though we were leery of President Roosevelt, we found him to be largely more receptive to our issues. But also in 1948, President Harry Truman, when President Harry Truman ran for president in 1948, the Democrats had a pro-civil rights agenda, And what this did was this caused Southern segregationists to separate, some Southern segregationists to separate and form the Dixiecrat Party. And Strom Thurmond ran for president in 1948 as a Dixiecrat. Okay. If we look here, and the Dixiecrats were anti-civil rights. If we look here, this is the piece I was looking for. This is from ChicagoMag.com. ChicagoMag.com. And this is called How the Party of Lincoln Lost Virtually the Entire Black Vote in 88 Years. How the Party of Lincoln lost virtually the entire black vote in 88 years. In 1928, the Chicago Defender, a black-owned newspaper, warned the GOP that it was in danger of alienating African Americans. They did not listen, and the fall came fast. Now, this is from July 29, 2016. The point I want to go to here is when they talk about the Lily White movement, okay? And this was a Southern strategy that was implemented by the Republican Party. Here's an excerpt of what Robert Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, wrote. Let's see here. So what the Defender did, okay, finally in October 20th, 1928 editorial entitled What We Want, the Chicago Defender made a dramatic announcement. We want justice in America, and we mean to get it. If 50 years of support to the Republican Party doesn't get us justice, then we must of necessity shift our allegiance to new quarters, end quote. It was the first time the Chicago Defender had failed to endorse the Republican presidential candidate since 1912. In the run-up to the 1912 election, Woodrow Wilson, despite a typical history as a Southern Democrat, had reached out to black voters, even though he was a white supremacist, including leaders like Dr. W.B. Du Bois. After Woodrow Wilson's victory, the paper, the Chicago Defender reported that a substantial number of blacks supported him. Once in office, President Woodrow Wilson immediately alienated his black supporters. Okay. Now, Robert Abbott Robert Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, is a diehard Republican his whole life, but with Herbert Hoover, who is explicitly, I wouldn't describe him as a racist, but he's interested in what he called a lily white Republican Party, a lily white Republican Party. This is after generations in which the Republican Party has stood for racial justice. So this was the lily white movement that begins in 1928. Okay. So scrolling down later in the article, it says the Republican National Convention was held in Chicago that summer, which to those at the Chicago Defender made the near absence of African Americans all the more galling. So now they're talking about, let's see, the Defender, what period of time? Right, they must be talking about right about 1928 here. Okay, the Republican National Convention was held in Chicago that summer, which to those at the Defender made the near absence of African Americans all the more galling. So consistently had Herbert Hoover, President Herbert Hoover, pursued his policy of making the party lily white, that the newspaper had to fight even to get African American delegates seated. Okay, so read the rest of this, and research the lily white movement of 1928, the lily white movement of 1928. And this was the effort by Republicans to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and to ignore our needs and concerns, etc. All right, now going back to this piece here from History.com, the official website of the History Channel, how Jim Crow era law suppressed the African American vote for generations. Okay, in this piece, they talk about the all-white primaries that took place in Texas. And this led to the lawsuit of Smith versus Allwright in 1944, which was won by Thurgood Marshall. All-white primaries. When literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and the many other ways to circumvent the 15th Amendment did not work to suppress Black voter turnout, white legislators in several southern states used all white primaries to all but eliminate Black voters' presence in the electoral process. In Texas, for example, the Texas state legislature gave the Democratic Party the authority to set its own rules. The party determined that it was for white voters only. It was for white voters only, excluding African Americans from its elections and effectively making local electoral politics dominated by one party that upheld Jim Crow laws. After a white election official blocked an African American man named Lonnie E. Smith the right to vote in the 1940 Texas Democratic primary, the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall and William H. Hastie, Hastie, challenged the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case Smith versus Allwright that the Texas white primary system was unconstitutional. Quote, the right to vote in a primary for the nomination,
to be famous.
The right to vote for a primary.
I've got to make something good.
The right to vote in a primary for the, let me pull this back up. Hold on. They had a video playing. I don't want that playing in this broadcast here. Let's go back down to this here. Let me go back to this. Okay, it said the right to vote in a primary for the nomination of candidates without discrimination by the state is a right secured by the Constitution, said the U.S. Supreme Court in an 8-1 U.S. Supreme Court decision. Okay, and that was Smith versus Allwright, right here. Okay, so read the rest of that. The name of this article is How Jim Crow Era Laws Suppressed the African American Vote for Generations. Okay, and that's at history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. Okay, now, okay, so check out those pieces. Now, there was back in March when we talked about Crystal Mason's conviction being overturned. We talked to on Roland Martin Unfiltered. We talked to her attorney then, and we mentioned a case of a white GOP official. And I want to look at this article here. NBC News had an article on this. And this is to show a contrast between the way Crystal Mason is being treated and how white people are being treated when they're convicted, in the rare cases when they're convicted of voter fraud. Let me pull this up. Okay, Georgia Republican Party official voted illegally 9 times. So this article right here from NBCnews.com. Georgia Republican Party official voted illegally 9 times, judge rules. Brian Pritchard, Pritchard, first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, was fined $5,000 for voting illegally and registering to vote while serving a sentence for a felony, a judge ruled. Now, he wasn't sentenced to prison time. Crystal Mason filed a provisional ballot that was not counted, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Okay, now here's Brian Pritchard. Okay, Republican official in Georgia, first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, another former Confederate state, Georgia, that has the largest Confederate monument out of anywhere in the country, called Stone Mountain. And on the side of Stone Mountain, they have carved into it. And I've been to Stone Mountain. I've been on top of Stone Mountain. I've walked up the side of Stone Mountain. They have the carvings of General Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, 3 Confederate traitors that they call hero, all slave owners. A judge ruled this week that a top Georgia, now this article is from March 28th, 2024. Now this article came out the same day that I think it was the same day, I think it was the same day of her conviction being overturned. Yeah, Crystal Mason's conviction was overturned Thursday, March 28th, 2024. The same day this article came out. A judge ruled this week that a top Georgia Republican Party official who has promoted former President Donald Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud affecting the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, this genius has repeatedly voted illegally, a judge ruled that week. Okay, so here you have Brian Pritchard, a top Georgia Republican Party official who's pushing the big lie, and white people in Georgia are pissed off that African Americans voted and got Biden and Harris elected, but also Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff as well. This guy was pushing the big lie, and a judge found him guilty of repeatedly voting illegally. He found that he voted illegally 9 times. Brian Pritchard, the first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party and a conservative talk show host, was fined $5,000 for voting illegally and registering to vote while serving a sentence for a felony conviction. Brian Pritchard was also ordered not to commit further violations, to face public reprimand for his conduct, and to pay the state election board's investigative costs. In a 25-page ruling Wednesday, Administrative Law Judge Lisa Boggs, B-O-G-G-S, affirmed the board's finding that Brian Pritchard had voted, check this out, had voted illegally 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He voted illegally 9 times in defiance of his extended probation in connection with a pair of felony convictions dating back nearly 30 years. So he had to pay a $5,000 fine for voting illegally 9 times. In Texas, they sentenced Crystal Mason to 5 years in prison for voting once, and her provisional ballot was not counted. And now, Texas District Attorney Phil Sorrells of Tarrant County wants her conviction reinstated. You can't make this stuff up. White man votes illegally 9 times, gets fined $5,000. Black woman votes illegally. They say illegally once. She was not told that she could not vote once, and her vote doesn't count. She gets sentenced to 5 years in prison. You can't make this stuff up. Brian Pritchard was initially sentenced in 1996 to 3 years probation in connection with felony forgery charges in Pennsylvania, according to the ruling. Okay, read the rest of this article here. This is Brian again. Great upstanding citizen. You know, he values voting so much, he voted illegally 9 times. A judge found, a judge ruled. That's not me saying it. All right, now, lastly, last article on this subject. Some people may ask the question. Well, we talked about some of the history of felony disenfranchisement laws and targeting African Americans, right? After slavery ends, to suppress the African American vote, to suppress our political power. Okay. Did you know that well, let me phrase the question like this. Back in, I think it was 2020, when Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, he was thinking about running again for president, right? And one of the things he was saying was that if you are a convicted felon, you should be able to vote from prison. Okay. And you had a lot of people who were laughing at him, saying he was crazy, didn't know what he was talking about. Okay. Now, sometimes he doesn't know sometimes he does sound crazy, but it's not because of that. Okay. He was right on that accord. He was right in that instance. All right. I have some disagreements with him. Sometimes he just, it's like, but he was right in this case, right? The reason why Bernie Sanders said that you should be able to vote from prison if you are a convicted felon is because in the state of Vermont, where he is a U.S. senator, you can vote from prison if you are a convicted felon. Also, you can do the same thing in the state of Maine. Now, why is it in Vermont and Maine right now you can be a convicted felon and vote from prison, but in Florida and Georgia and Mississippi and a lot of those former Confederate states, you could not? Is because Maine and Vermont did not have a history of having large populations of African Americans, as well as having large populations of slaves. Their history, even though they did have slavery, at least in Maine, their history is different than those former Confederate states that took up arms against the Union and formed the Confederacy to maintain slavery. Their history is different. Let's look at this article from NBCnews.com. Most states disenfranchise felons. Maine and Vermont allow inmates to vote from prison. Advocates say the rehabilitative effects of letting inmates have a voice is profound. Now, this article is from February 26, 2018 by Jane C. Timm, Timm, for NBC News. Okay. And in the article here, it says, okay, so they talk about this gentleman, Joseph Jackson, was one of the millions of Americans inspired by Barack Obama's 2008 White House bid. Let's see here. Okay, Jackson, okay, he's 52 years old. He was convicted in Maine, one of just 2 states that allow felons to vote from behind bars. In the U.S., nearly all convicted felons are disenfranchised during their prison sentences and often barred from the ballot for years after release. Okay, now, in 2018, when Florida put on the ballot restoring voting rights to felons, at that time, only 4 states banned felons from voting for life. Florida was one of them. And that law in Florida dated back to 1868 when Florida wrote their state constitution. So all these black conservatives out here who want to talk about how slavery is behind us, slavery's in the past, slavery has nothing to do with today. They don't want to talk about laws that are in existence today that are the legacy of slavery, the vestiges of slavery, and were put in place like that 1868 felony disenfranchisement law 3 years after the Civil War ended. And it was put in place to suppress the political power of African Americans, of former slaves. Sometimes offenders lose the right to vote for life. But as the impact of felony disenfranchisement laws grows along with skyrocketing incarceration rates, others are rethinking the rules that kept 6.1 million Americans from voting in 2016. Now, under the U.S. prison population dropped each year of the Obama administration and each year in the Biden-Harris administration. The Biden-Harris administration, I think it's fallen some also. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know in the Obama administration, the U.S. prison population dropped each year, and the war on drugs was declining, was winding down under the Obama administration as well. But as the impact of felony disenfranchisement, Alabama, Maryland, and Wyoming all recently eased voting restrictions for released felons, while Florida organizers have put a constitutional amendment on November's ballot to give most offenders their voting rights back after completing their sentences, including for any on probation or parole. So that's 2018. So they're talking about November 2018. Meanwhile, Maine and Vermont remain unique in preserving voting right voting rights for prisoners and serve as a model for states like New Jersey, where Democrats newly in control of all three branches of government plan to propose a bill to stop the disenfranchisement of felons and allow them to vote from behind bars. Advocates say the rehabilitative effects of letting incarcerated felons have a voice in their communities are profound, while critics argue they should not be permitted to take part in any process that could end up affecting the very laws they've broken. Well, when people get out of prison and get a job, they don't have problems. They don't have a problem with taking their taxes. They don't have a problem with taking their taxes. So why shouldn't they be able to vote? Okay, read the rest of this piece here. This is at NBCnews.com. Most states disenfranchise felons. Maine and Vermont allow inmates to vote from prison. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 2 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover. We deal with 80 to 100 articles, and I put together this class. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. Okay, I've been studying history 34 years now. Do lectures across the country. Been hosting the African History Network show 14 years. But we look at there's over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles that we'll go through and look at, the 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I'll show you excerpts of the books on the screen usually. And we look at video clips of interviews I've done with historians like Professor James Small, Professor Kabahai Wapakamane, Anthony Browder, who wrote Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, which is one of the books we use in the class, Runoko Rashidi, who wrote Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe, which is another book that we use in the class. Okay, so you can register for this. This content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, and we'll post the link here. The link's in the thread of this broadcast. And you can support us through PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. So we have the information right here on our website as well. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there. These are fake African History Network Cash App accounts here that have been stealing money from us. There are a few other ones out there I've identified. I'm still trying to get them shut down. You can click right here on our link and it shows our QR code, okay, for Cash App. This helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, etc. Upgrade equipment.